It's a really, really good question, and I don't really know what the answer is. I could give you a relatively flippant bumper sticker, new age guru answer. I suppose the goal is being mindful, being aware, living in the moment, living in the present, but these are just ridiculous and childish things to say. You know, if I was to put your question within the context of some of the heroes, whether it's Jesus or Gilgamesh or the Buddha or Muhammad, I suppose it begins with a sense of confusion, like something about you breaks open and you look around and you just can't relate to anything. It happens gradually. It's like a dam breaking. It's a small crack, then it gets bigger and bigger, and then you have water seeping from this end. They're droplets. But then there comes a point it just gushes out, and before you know it, the entire dam falls apart. And all the buildings basically get destroyed and drowned. And so, as your life begins to fall apart, and it can fall apart in two ways. When things are going okay, one day you just you're laying next to your companion, you wake up at 2 in the morning and you have no idea why you're there. And it's never happened before. And you happen to be, 35, 36. And you have a relatively comfortable life. And it has to be a comfortable life. You can't begin to ask those questions if, you can't make rent, or your relationship is abusive, or it's just dead, or, your life is just not functioning well. Your life is going forward like a very fine-tuned engine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that everything looks good on the outside, and just one night you wake up and you have no idea why you're just not feeling well. And then if you keep nourishing that, then the cracks in your relationship and your perspective about your life begin to get bigger and bigger and bigger until, you just walk out. The other is, which happens to, I think, most of us. You read a book, you go to a workshop, or you go to a church and someone is giving a sermon, or the book happens to be really interesting. And, the book tells you something about the spiritual quest, I suppose, self-knowledge, or understanding yourself better, or how to become happy. And so, let's just say you're talking about the Buddha. And he says, okay, well, nothing is working, I'm going to leave you. And, some old guy asks him, where are you going? And he says, my life isn't working, I'm going to figure out the answers. What am I made for? What am I destined to do? What's my purpose? And the guy says, well, if you knock on that door over there, there's a guy that has all the answers. And the guy listens to your questions and observes the emotions behind the questions. And, they look at your body language and they ask you some seemingly ridiculous questions, but not really. And then they say, if you do, just come to the house every day, and we'll sit, we'll talk, we'll have some food, we'll do some exercises, and hopefully after a few years, things will happen to you. And that's what the Buddha does, I suppose. He follows all the religious folks in the forest, and there comes a point after 9, 10, 15, 20 years where something about him opens up and he understands. And in some sense, I suppose you could say that he has reached the destination, whatever that may mean. I'm not quite sure what people mean by enlightenment. I'm not sure what they mean by nirvana. But something about him had changed. And you would think that he'd be okay after having reached the destination, whatever it may be. But he's not completely happy or satisfied. He goes back to the very people, he considered to be his teachers or his friends. And he tells them that they're wrong. Why do you need to do that? You wanted, so to speak, enlightenment, and you received it. So what do you care what other people are doing? But it seems as if something has shifted. Your destination is no longer about fasting and praying and destroying your body, finding inner silence. Perhaps you've done all of those things and something about you has changed and you've understood a few things, but it's not enough. It seems as if, this process that's taking place is pushing you to all of a sudden be for other people. And all along you thought that the task is really just to get to know yourself. And then you can rest, you can find Sabbath, And in some ways, I suppose, it's accurate because something about you now for the first time in your life is crystallized. You have understood. It's like an anchor. It doesn't matter where you go. You're not going to go very far from what you have found. And even if in physical life you were to make mistakes, small or big, that anchor is not going to go away. You always know when the center is, and you can always go back to it. Not without pain or struggle, but it's there. But you realize that you no longer really need to fast or pray. You need to kind of communicate or share what lives inside you now with other people. And you do. You find people who are interested. You find people who are interesting. But even founding, you realize it's not really the destination. It's trying to make sure that I suppose they understand. And language, you realize, is a very tricky thing because for the past 20, 30, 40 years, all these people have been using different dictionaries to find the meaning to specific words. And what you're trying to do really is to destroy their dictionary, destroy the definitions that they have gotten from dictionaries. And you want them to read your dictionary and find and accept the meaning that you will give them. And I suppose there is really, no one knows, what it is that people are looking for. And I don't think really there is an end. And I think it's very much like, what you find in the first chapter of Taoism. It's something that you can't describe. It's something that you can't really talk about. It's something profoundly beautiful, but the moment you try to describe it, it becomes ugly. And it's a curious thing, the sort of shifts that go through you. First, you're profoundly selfish, you're closed off because you have lost everything simply because you wanted to find out who you are. And the idea of who you are is you have no idea what you ought to embody that's meaningful to you. I used to like the idea of being a professor, but it doesn't mean anything. I used to like the idea of being a father, but now it doesn't do anything, or son, or being this or being that. It seems as if all the things I used to embody have fallen off of me, and I look at myself and it's just a hollow shell. It's kind of like what Attar has in Mantahotair, the very book that you're talking about, which is مرده ام میروم بر روی خاک زنده گردان جانم جان بخش پاک. That it is true, I'm walking around, I'm breathing, I'm talking, but the truth is I'm just but a corpse. There is nothing of value in me. There is nothing that has meaning. I embody nothing. Inside me just lives a cemetery. I'm just pretending. And you become enormously self-centered. You're depressed, you're sad. You are depressed, you are sad, you are angry. You feel betrayed. It's all about you. And then little by little you begin to understand. I can't give you cliches as to what it is that you understand. Maybe you understand the way your physical body is situated in a physical world, specific locations in the physical world, and every physical location has its own unique forces. And then they assault you, and they harass you, and they abuse you. And then all of a sudden you're forced to kind of look at your environment and figure out, what are these forces? Where are they coming from? Who are the cause of these forces? And what's happening to you? Why can't you get out? And you can't. The world is one gigantic assault machine. And the first task is you try to figure out what to do with all of these things until you realize the world is far too big and you're miserable and you're not interested in all the things that live here. And like the Buddha, you just walk away thinking that there is something greater out there. And so you leave. And you do imitate because you actually think other people have something to say and something to share. And then after a while, it's just no longer about you. And I think the bigger your questions are, the deeper the roots are, it'll be difficult to find people with whom you can share those deep-rooted issues. But once you do, maybe that's the whole thing, finding someone to break bread with. You're either giving bread or you're receiving bread. When I was with Hussein, I was receiving bread. The only bread I could give Hussein was once in a while go to the shop and maybe sweep the floors, or go to his house and wash dishes, or maybe serve tea. Or if he asked me, are you willing to come to the park and sell ice cream for me, I would say, yeah, that's the least I could do. Then there came a point where I realized that perhaps I could also give what little I have to others. And it's a thing that comes to, I think, all of us, that after a while you just kind of get exhausted and you realize that it's really no longer about giving bread or receiving bread. You just want to be left alone for the most part. You've paid your dues. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make, as you move from one stage to another, the destination changes. And it's very much like a relationship where you're alone. The destination is you want to find someone, then you find them. Then the destination is getting to know them. Then all of a sudden you realize, well, you love them. Then the next destination, are they mature enough to commit? Then you want to get married. Then the destination is to maybe having children. Then you raise them. Then you look at the husband and the wife. You realize, well, it's all good, but I just, want to be left alone for a while. And then you get older, and then you get sicker, and then all of a sudden you say, well, I'm glad that I didn't divorce, because now he or she is taking me to Kaiser on a daily basis. And then comes a point where you're sick, too sick, and the only thing that really you're intimate with is pain. No one can reach you, not your parents, not your children, not your wife or husband, and then that's the next stage, to understand how to live with pain. And I think every stage that you walk into, it has its own set of questions and curiosities. It has its own set of confusion, anxieties, and fears. And then it has its completion or acceptance of various things. And once you get there, you move on to the next stage. And it's, and it's an interesting, I think, way of looking at all of this. Because, you look at Muhammad, he's just, he's discontent. You look at Jesus, he's discontent, he's unhappy. You look at Moses, and they all go somewhere in private, and they seek seclusion. And I don't know what they find, I don't know what they experience, but all of a sudden they become a shepherd to their people. I mean, it's a daunting task. It would have been much easier for them to just go into the cave and just sit and pray and contemplate, but apparently that wasn't enough for them, or whatever it is that they experienced made them responsible for a bigger thing. In some ways, I think Krishnamurti had the right idea, but he didn't articulate it well. And I'm not quite sure why. What Krishnamurti does is that he is like a vacuum cleaner, in the sense that when you look at people, all of us, what do we have? Well, we have our cultures, we have our personal histories, we have our beliefs, we have our hurts and wounds and memories. And all these things create assumptions. They create purpose, they create meaning and relevance. In some sense, they create a self or an I. So he comes in and he destroys all of it. Belief is bad, culture is bad, tradition is bad, everything you touch really is bad. And I don't think that all the literature I've read about Krishnamurti, talks I've heard of him, he has never mentioned depression. I don't think he ever has. But when you remove all the beliefs, if that's the purpose, you're left with nothing. It's really quite dark in there, inside you. And somehow you have to wait and wait and wait and wait. But he wouldn't use that language, because for him, there is no soul, there is no God, there is no this, there is no that. And maybe he used that language because he didn't want to create any images for people. He wanted them to live in darkness, And if you live in the darkness long enough and you have the stamina, and if you're lucky, then something about you just explodes and you understand. And it's a very elusive thing. And I think some people are lucky enough to be content with whatever it is that they find on this path.